I'm Bob Crawford,
I'm Ben Sawyer.
and this is The Road to Now.
Yes, it is. The road to the Constitution, then and now. And our guest today has this incredible initiative, right? It's called American Promise is where you can find it. And he is working for the ratification of the For Our Freedom Amendment, which we will get to in this episode. And I think everyone who's listening, I'm going to say there's going to be like a 99% on board rating with this. But let's just start off, Jeff, since we're talking about amending the Constitution, and this is a process that hasn't happened in a long time. Let's go back. Could you just take us back and, the founding, when in 1787, when those guys met in that hot room in Philadelphia, one of the 7 articles is dedicated to the process for amending this Constitution. It was central to their vision of the country. Could you just explain why they were so interested in this and why this was a central feature of the Constitution?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben and Bob. Thanks for having me on. Great to be here. And when the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention came out and that day in 1787 with a proposed constitution, one of the key things, as you say, Ben, was Article 5, which said that the people, remember the Constitution opens with "we the people," and Article 5 is what makes that real. Because Article 5 said that the people, whenever the American people see it necessary, can amend the Constitution. And it provided 2 ways of doing it in the article. One is by a passage of 2/3 vote in Congress, which then gets ratified in 3/4 of the states. And just in case Congress was a little bit of non-performing, we know that would never happen, but hypothetically speaking, if Congress were to somehow become dysfunctional, the states could call a convention with 2/3 vote in the states, and then you would still need ratification of any proposed amendments out of that convention in 3/4 of the states. So that's how the mechanism was proposed in the Constitution. And it's a good thing it was, or the Constitution would never have been ratified. They came out of Philadelphia, and immediately the people back home, they're reading the Constitution, they're saying, where's the Bill of Rights? How do I know that the government isn't going to come and, take over my town or my house or whatever? How do I have free speech? And only because of Article 5, we got the Constitution ratified with essentially a deal that, okay, we'll give you what you're demanding, Americans, and we got the first 10 amendments to the Constitution in that founding era. And those are the big ones, the Bill of Rights and freedom of speech and due process and so much more. So we've been using this amendment process from the very beginning, and we're using it today.
A couple of things I think that, well, first of all, I will say this, for those of you guys who are trying to remember the Constitution, it's almost always 2/3. But the highest bar set in the Constitution is actually the 3/4 requirement that 3/4 of the states ratify it to check any type of corruption, to set the bar high. But you bring up an interesting point here, which I think one of the things that frequently confuses my students is the fact that the Constitution goes into place and it's ratified in 1788. But the first 10 amendments aren't added to the Constitution until the ratification in December of 1791. And that speaks to the fact that this was central. One of the first things Madison gets to work on when Congress meets for the first time in 1789 is proposing these and getting them out of the state. So it was central there.
Absolutely. We've been amending the Constitution ever since, 27 different amendments. They come around every few generations. Americans relearn about this because things get bad. And if you go back, eight of these 27 amendments actually reversed and nullified Supreme Court decisions. So the idea that the Supreme Court is the only interpreter and orderer of what the Constitution means wasn't intended by the founders. And that's the other function of this Article 5 that the founders put in is, what if the Supreme Court gets it wrong? How do we fix that? And 8 of our amendments show how we amend the Constitution to correct bad Supreme Court decisions. One of the very first amendments after the Bill of Rights actually did that. The Supreme Court, in a case called Chisholm versus Georgia, decided not long after the founding of the country that the federal courts, the new federal courts created by this Constitution, could decide cases when creditors sued the states. And to the states and many Americans, that was a real breach of the notion of federalism, that the state should not be hauled into a federal court and have federal judges decide whether they owed money or not to creditors. And so Chisholm versus Georgia was almost immediately reversed by the 11th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And that set the precedent for, Dred Scott being reversed and many other terrible Supreme Court decisions that the American people decided, no, that's not what we think the Constitution means. And the amendment process fixed it.
So, opening on this conversation about the Fifth Amendment, we will now expand to why you're here. Because you're here because you have an amendment, the For Our Freedom Amendment, that American Promise is trying to get passed.
That's right, Bob. And we at American Promise, we essentially decided when we launched, which was now almost a decade ago, very beginning of 2015, to test the proposition that we are still capable of amending the Constitution in America. Because even then, 10 years ago, Americans were very concerned about the role of money in politics. The Supreme Court had made a series of decisions saying that if you have money, whether you're a corporation, whether you're a billionaire, whatever, you can use unlimited money to influence the outcome of elections. Americans were really concerned about that already back then. States like Montana and Colorado and others had started passing resolutions saying, we want an amendment to the Constitution. But there was actually no organization where Americans could go regardless of how they voted or what party they were in, and just work together to actually get an amendment passed and ratified. So we decided to start one, and that's American Promise. And the amendment is called the For Our Freedom Amendment. And it has now moved through. 23 states have backed the amendment. It's getting support in Congress. So it's the real thing. And we can demystify it. It fits on a napkin, like most good American ideas. And so basically, it takes all those Supreme Court decisions about money and politics, which essentially stripped us, the people, of deciding what's corruption, what should the limits be, if any. That's really traditionally the role of the states and the people to make those decisions. And so we don't take a position on any of the policy about it. This is more about who decides. And we think the states and Congress and the people decide what is corruption, how do we deal with money in politics, not a handful of judges in Washington. So we call it the For Our Freedom Amendment. It's moving ahead, and I think I can say with confidence after 10 years that we are no less than any generation of Americans who came before us. And just like them, we're going to amend the Constitution to fix real serious issues and really mistaken decisions of the court. And we see this getting done in just the next few years.
Well, so you mentioned that the judges in Washington don't really see it your way, many of them. And this became very relevant just a few weeks ago when there were arguments before the court in a case, National Republican Senatorial Committee versus the Federal Election Commission. This is a very relevant case to what we're talking about today. Can you set the case up for us?
Sure. So the case is yet another challenge to laws passed by either the states or Congress for the past 5 decades, essentially. Since the Supreme Court declared itself the decider of campaign finance rules in a case called Buckley versus Vallejo back in the 1970s. It was the first time in 200 years the Supreme Court had ever said that the First Amendment has anything to do with rules about corruption and money in politics. So the Supreme Court decided, without any grounding in the First Amendment itself, which protects the freedom of speech, that spending money is speech, and if money being spent is freedom of speech, therefore, laws that limit spending of money are going to be scrutinized by the court, and the court will decide if they pass muster or not. So since then, we've had dozens and dozens of cases. This NRC, National Republican Senate Committee versus FEC case is the latest in a series of cases where basically, and it's both sides, and it's donors and it's the politicians. They bring these cases to the courts because they essentially the court has invited them to say, hey, if you don't like the rules that the people decided on or that the legislature decided on, don't debate them. Don't use the political process as it's supposed to be used. Just come to us and we'll decide, and maybe you'll get rid of them. So this is another one. The law says that the parties are not are limited in their spending if they're going to coordinate with the candidates, and it's basically a law that is a reflection of the notion that if you give a whole lot of money to a candidate and they get elected, they're going to owe you rather than the people who elected you, as it's supposed to be. But because the Supreme Court has been striking down so many of the congressional laws and the state laws that were trying to address that concern of corruption of our political process, it now seems to some a little quaint, and it is. They're right that the parties have these limits, and yet one guy can put $300 million into a super PAC, or any billionaire can put all the money they want. Or we now have foreign controlled corporations spending money in elections, and yet the parties, the argument in this case says, are still limited. That doesn't make sense. And so we don't take a position at American Promise about whether that argument is sound or not. The point is that argument essentially is created because the court itself made up all these rules, and now every case they're trying to fix the rules. So we filed a brief in the case, and our position is, look, why is the court even taking this case? If you don't like that limit on the parties, Congress could fix it today. They could pass a law saying, hey, super PACs are spending all this money. We want the parties to be able to keep up, and we can spend money too. That's a policy decision. That's not a constitutional decision. So our position is basically this constitutional amendment is the way the court should follow and get out of the business of trying to micromanage campaign finance laws and put it back with the people where it belongs. But the court, we don't expect that from the court. They haven't done it in 5 decades. They're probably not going to do it now. That's why we need the amendment, or we're just beginning. We had a $20 billion election in 2024. They're projecting North Carolina's Senate race at over $1 billion in 2026. I'm up in Maine at the moment, where the Susan Collins race in 2026. This is a state with almost no media market, and they're talking about a $600 million Senate race. And the money is not coming from people who live here. It's coming from forces and power that wants to control the United States Senate. That's the battle that's going on. And until the court stops this sort of, intervention in the people's anti-corruption laws, it's going to keep getting worse.
Jeff, I want to ask you to actually read the amendment here in a second, because I think that'd be great to set the rest of the conversation. But first, I think to understand this and the wording here, I would like for you first, if you could, to talk about the Citizens United case in 2010, which really is a 1-2 with the Buckley case. And I think then it will make clear why the wording in your amendment makes so much sense. Could you set that up and just kind of break down what Citizens United did?
Yeah, sure. So the Citizens United case is a decision in 2010 where the Supreme Court was asked to decide on the constitutionality of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. That was a law commonly known at the time as McCain-Feingold, and it was bipartisan. Democratic Senator Russ Feingold from Wisconsin, Arizona Senator John McCain, Republican. And so it was a bipartisan law passed by Congress, signed by President Bush into law, and took effect. It was actually that law which was intended to close loopholes, the so-called soft money that was evading the limits that had been set by federal law on contributions to candidates and the parties, because, again, people concerned too much money flowing in can corrupt the process. So over time, of course, the politics being politics and money being money, people and lawyers found ways to get around those laws, and McCain-Feingold was trying to close those loopholes and protect the process from the undue influence of money. So the court first approved of the law and decided it wasn't unconstitutional in about 2004. Chief Justice Rehnquist then passed away. Justice O'Connor from Arizona, actually the last justice who had ever actually run for anything and served. She had served with distinction in the Arizona state legislature. She knew something about politics, so she deferred to the Congress about how to address this problem. But she retired. The court changed, and with Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito and other justices, they basically saw a new challenge come up in the case of Citizens United, and the argument was the limits on corporations, the limits on unions, the closing of the soft money loopholes violated the freedom of speech of the plaintiff. In the case was a nonprofit corporation called Citizens United, but the argument actually got expanded to basically cover any corporation and any amount of money, and the court very intentionally looked back to the Buckley case of the 1970s. And in that case, they said that we made it very clear if it's independent spending, i.e., if it's not going directly to the candidate's campaign, but is actually going into PACs or other methods of spending money to influence elections, we in Buckley said that can't be limited because that would violate free speech. Again, it was the court's invention of that theory, but that's what the Citizens United decision said. So they basically doubled down on Buckley. They struck down the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act in 2010, and then they took 4 more cases, and they made it very clear that they have intend to prevent the American people from having these laws. The next case that came up was Montana, had a 100-year-old law limiting the spending of corporations in that state because they'd been through the Gilded Age when the copper companies and many others basically controlled the state. Montana's courts upheld the law against a challenge by what we would now think of as a dark money super PAC. It wasn't called that at the time. This is about 2012. And the Supreme Court, in a 1-paragraph decision, no explanation, cited Buckley, Citizens United, and said Montana and all the laws of the states that try to do that, limiting money in their elections, are invalid and violate the First Amendment. So Citizens United really accelerated the drive of into into our system, which is why we're now seeing multi-billion-dollar elections and dark money and everything else.
So just to set this up before you read it, this is something where you're talking about you had bipartisan support for this type of a policy in Congress. You have state laws that are now being overridden by the Supreme Court decision. And for folks who are listening, I just want to key in on this point. Really, this is returning power to folks, taking it away from the Supreme Court, as you said. So could you please, Jeff, read the amendment? And by the way, guys, if you're thinking it's going to be long, it's not. It's brilliantly short. So Jeff, take the floor, please.
I will, and it is short, and it does exactly what you say, Ben, which is put the power to decide about money and politics back in the hands of the American people. But just before I read Section 1 of the amendment, and it will be short, I want to just unpack one other thing the court does, because Section 1 really corrects the key mistake the court made around this. So the First Amendment, freedom of speech, we're very serious about free speech, as are most Americans, right? We want free speech. We want more speech, not less speech. The Supreme Court, in considering how money influences the political system and our elections, decided that the way they're going to think about whether it violates free speech is only if the law prevents what the court calls quid pro quo corruption. That's lawyers do that thing. They go into Latin when they don't want anyone to know what's happening. And so quid pro quo corruption is essentially the kind of corruption that's like bribery. Quid pro quo means this for that. I'll give you a bag of cash if you give me a good law. Even the Supreme Court says you're not allowed to do that. So, but that's the only thing they say. So that used to be the First Amendment had a much more nuanced, you worried about bribery, but you also worried about systemic corruption and that's what we're seeing now. It's like all the money coming in basically just shifts all the incentives. So our politicians are spending all their time raising money and catering to the needs of the donors rather than the constituents. That's systemic corruption. The court says, no, that doesn't count. You're not allowed to do anything about that. Well, what about federalism? How about the Montana and the states deciding how their elections should be run. No, the court says, no, we don't care about that. How about the equal rights of Americans? Like, what about the free speech of somebody who doesn't have money? How do they get heard? How does your vote and your equal right to representation get affected if there's unlimited money by the few who can actually spend it? The court says no, equality, equal rights of Americans have nothing to do with the First Amendment. So I am not exaggerating. Chief Justice Roberts, in a case called Arizona Free Enterprise, said that Arizona claims that they're trying to level the playing field. That is evidence that it is unconstitutional under our cases. Leveling the playing field is unconstitutional. So now let's read the amendment, because that is the problem we're fixing. So Section 1 says, we, the people, have compelling sovereign interests in freedom of speech, representative self-government, federalism, the integrity of the electoral process, and the political equality of natural persons. So that's the opening. It's like, court, you got it wrong. The First Amendment means a lot more than just quid pro quo corruption. Section 2 does the work. It says, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to forbid Congress or the states within their respective jurisdictions from reasonably regulating and limiting contributions and spending in campaigns, elections, or ballot measures. Boom, the power just goes back from the courts to the people and our elected representatives. Big transfer of power, Section 2. Now, Section 3 does something really important. Remember, Citizens United said, hey, we don't care if it's corporations spending money, if it's foreign governments, if it's AI or whatever is coming at us in the future doing this. If it's influence, it is free speech, and you're not allowed to stop it. Well, the American people care a lot. So Section 3 fixes that. Congress and the states shall have the power to implement and enforce this article by appropriate legislation, and may distinguish between natural persons, that's human beings, and artificial entities, including by prohibiting artificial entities from raising and spending money in campaigns, elections, or ballot measures. So that's it. That's the amendment. And you may say, well, that sounds obvious, but it isn't. Without an amendment, we don't get any of that. The Supreme Court says none of this is actually, not only is it not obvious, we're not allowed to do it without an amendment. So that's why we're doing the amendment.
So in order to pass this amendment, we need a government that works. We need a political system that works the way it should. Because even if this amendment were somehow to pass, can you imagine the Congress as it is constituted today coming together to create regulations on campaign spending?
Yes. Let me tell you why. So the reason we the people, again, it won't happen without us doing it. So if we decide it won't work or we're not going to do it, it won't happen. But Americans regard money in politics, according to Pew Research, it is the top issue. It's ahead of immigration. It's ahead of crime. It's ahead of the economy. Americans know this is coming home to roost. Our jobs, our communities, our kids, our futures, everything is being now corrupted and influenced by this. So it's become, I think, for most Americans, a serious existential issue. So if we decide, well, we're going to do something about it, we will get the votes to do it. And let me tell you the evidence for that. So we have now been at it for the better part of a decade. We are winning in state. First, the polling is through the roof. Probably 90% agreement. 3/4 of Americans already support the amendment. And how do we know that's true? Well, we've won 7 ballot initiatives, 7-0. We've never lost. The most recent in Maine, 86% yes vote to back this amendment. But we got to win, as your point refers to, Bob. We got to get legislative votes, and that might be harder than just what do the people think. So let's look at the legislative votes. We've got 23 state legislatures who have now passed laws saying that we resolve to support this constitutional amendment. We want our congressional delegation to vote it out, and we're ready to ratify it. Essentially, that's what these resolutions say. 23 states. The most recent in Utah, here's the vote in Utah this year, 63-9 in the House, 20-4 in the Senate. And so we win these in the states, and then we also have a serious congressional operation because we need a 2/3 vote in Congress and then ratification in three-quarters of the states. So we're going to keep building those states. We'll be in 14 more states in 2026, piling those wins on. But we're also bringing the state legislatures to Washington. So let me give you one example. I was in Texas, and Texas Republican, I'm talking with him. He looks at our map and he sees, California, New York, and he says, "Wow, you're getting the blue states. Why would the Democrats be for this?" And then if I'm talking to the Democrats, they look at our map and they say, "Whoa, West Virginia, Alaska, Utah." And we passed the House in Oklahoma unanimously. They're saying, why are the Republicans voting for this? So people can vote for it for completely different reasons, and that's perfectly fine. American Promise, we are Republicans, Democrats, Independents. We don't care who you vote for. We're uniting the people behind this. So another Texan, Senator Angela Paxton, and let me just say, actually, that I should preface this. Most of the Democrats are already on board the amendment. They have been since Citizens United. So we got about 200 votes in the House. All Democrats, we need 290. Those are going to come from the Republicans. Same in the Senate. The Democrats kind of got a head start on being for this because, it was a conservative court. Barack Obama spoke against it. Just that in Washington, it became kind of a partisan thing. That's no longer true. So now the Republicans in Congress are hearing from, like Utah, that kind of vote I mentioned, Oklahoma, the kind of vote I mentioned. We passed the Senate in Wyoming. These are red states. And so Angela Paxton's a state senator from Texas, and she is a lead sponsor of this amendment effort in Texas. She came to Washington to meet with her Republican colleagues in Congress and spoke to rooms full of Republicans who are really interested in this issue. They're going to introduce their own amendment. We don't expect kumbaya in Washington. There'll be competing amendments. So the Republicans will introduce something that looks like the amendment I described. The Democrats have one that looks like the amendment I described. There's a few nuances, and they'll argue about it and fight to take credit for it. But we'll get that vote in just the next few years because here's the key: not because we're naive about politics, but because what do these people want most of all? They want to get reelected, right? They want to win. And the work we do in the states make it that if they vote for this, they will have a much better chance of winning than if they vote against this. And so they'll have pressure from their donors. They'll have pressure from people who don't want this. But it's our job as Americans to make sure our pressure is bigger than that. And we've demonstrated over and over again we can do that. So I do see this, every amendment is hard. Imagine being, the people who had to get a progressive income tax amendment going around the country saying we want to raise taxes, right? And they did it. Imagine the people who got the amendment that says we're going to elect our senators. We're not going to let the states legislatures in back smoke-filled rooms decide who's going to be senator. We're going to take it to the voters. An unelected Senate had to vote 2/3 for that, and the American people got it done at the time. And so, I think it's really just up to us about getting it done. But there's such strong support for this, and frankly, the incentives for the politicians who have to raise money all the time, who are blindsided by, some cranky billionaire who doesn't like what they said and now is spending $100 million to take them out. They don't like this system either. So this is a real chance to get this done.
So the firmament of this moment, though, is we had an election in 2024 where Elon Musk gave, donated 260 million to Donald Trump. He was giving away $1 million to people who signed up to vote, who would likely vote for Donald Trump. The administration has embraced the tech billionaires. They're running roughshod because they have this money to donate to the president's ballroom or to something that one of his initiatives. They get special favors. The quid pro quo is out in the open. These Republican senators and congressmen, their campaigns are being funded by Elon Musk and other billionaires. How in this moment, and believe me, I love your enthusiasm. I do believe in this cause, but explain to me, how in this moment are you getting that support? And could you get support from a Michael Whatley who's running for Senate against Roy Cooper? in North Carolina, who's running here coming up in 2026. So it is hard to see this becoming real when you look around at the world that we're living in today.
Yeah, well, it is very real. We're getting the votes. The key is that we get enough of the votes. And so, Bob, you put your finger on the problem. That is an accurate description of the current situation, except it's not quite complete because that's the description the Democrats give me when they say, why would the Republicans ever be for this? Talk to some Republicans, and they'll give you a long list of Democratic billionaires, including, there's a story in the Washington Post this morning about Governor Pritzker in Illinois. He spent $300 million to get elected of his own money to get elected twice, governor of Illinois. And now, they're talking about him as the presidential candidate because, hey, we need our billionaires to go against their billionaires. And if that's the system we want, that's what we're going to have because that is where it's headed. And so both sides, we have to take it as a given that your description, Bob, is an accurate description of both sides and anyone who's going into this system. And they know it. It is not possible for someone to run and succeed. If some billionaire can run and spend $300 million, you gotta raise money yourself or find your billionaire. And that's the systemic crisis we're in. That doesn't end with democracy and freedom. It ends with oligarchy and authoritarianism. So
Yeah, you have to raise $301 billion.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So, we can talk ourselves out of doing it right up front and say, well, that's just too hard. But, that would sure let down, not only the future, but it would let down the past because, that would have been the case for anything good that Americans ever did, including our revolution. Like, take on the British Empire? Really? You guys are
Yeah.
nuts.
Thank
So,
you,
so
Jeff. Thank you. Now, this is the sunshine, the night sky of me and Bob, because all I'm thinking about here is, the Bob, when we first started the show, we were talking about the populist movement, right? In the 1890s. And like they come out with this manifesto and then in like the at the end of the 1890s, and they're like, we believe that senators should be directly elected. There should be a progressive income tax. That there should be limits to the workday. And everybody was like, yeah, right. And then, by 1913, two of those things are constitutional amendments, right? But you got to keep talking about it. You got to
Yeah, I
believe it.
think I think history moves. What is the saying? Like you have decades. Decades can happen in weeks, right? Like once the critical mass of the population, because imagine like I imagine like okay, let's say I'm a Republican and I'm a congressman in North Carolina, and I'm gonna run for re-election. I'm like, oh man, I gotta raise money. I gotta raise a ton of money. I don't even like Elon Musk, but I need to suck up to him because this is where the money's going to come from. It's exhausting. It would be an exhausting life. Like you're just
yeah.
going around and asking people to give you money and sucking up to them to get the money. Let me ask you your thoughts on this, Jeff. You're talking about the Supreme Court going back to like these short decisions, these like they have a ruling. It's like one paragraph. This is the way it is. We're seeing more and more what they call the shadow docket, where there'll be someone will raise a question in the Supreme Court. They'll take it up 7 p.m. on a Monday night. You get an unsigned order with one word, two words, one sentence. There's your decision. It's like the Supreme Court is ruling by fiat, is what it feels like. In this case, the NRSC versus the FEC, one of the plaintiffs is J.D. Vance, the sitting vice president. He was a plaintiff when he was still a senator. But talk about the court's role in all of this at this moment, not historically, but where we've been the past 5 years.
Yeah. So, we don't talk about the court all that much. I'm happy to do it. I practiced law a long time. I filed a brief in the Supreme Court in the Citizens United case, participated in that Montana case that came up and was disappointed by the one paragraph decision. A lot of us, I think, in the country would welcome not only, a more thorough review of things and explanations, and less reliance on a shadow docket like that. I think, in a lot of ways, the court is has a bigger problem, in my view, and that's the lack of humility, and they have become very used to the role of the court as the decider of issues that really, in my view, should rest with the people. And, in some instances, they are correcting that because that's been coming a long time. The court, conservatives have criticized the activist court when it was liberals doing it, and now it's an activist court when conservatives are doing it. But I think it would be better not to have an activist court and let the democratic processes play out and have a more humble court that doesn't see itself as the micromanager, and now, without any need to explain too much, just decide these things. So that's what I think the real issue is. But the reason I say, the court is really important, and I don't mean to say, oh, we don't pay attention to the court, because it's on the issue that we're focused on around money and politics, which, is the only thing American Promise does. So and that's really important because, the way we hold Americans together is people trust us. We disclose all our donors. We say, this is no bait and switch. You sign up for this amendment, you're not suddenly going to get healthcare policy and energy policy and everything else. This is the only thing we do. And so that means we're not that in the fight or weeds or arguments of the day about what the Supreme Court's latest outrage is, because I think it's really important that we at American Promise do our job, which is to serve all Americans, focused on how do we get this amendment ratified. And so Bob, to your point about like history happens in a week sometimes, that's exactly how amendments happen. If you look at moments that are very similar in my view, and Ben's the historian, so he'll correct me, but these eras in history in America where power concentrates and the wheels start coming off democracy, right? So, we saw it Ben referred to the amendments passed after the populist era, 4 amendments between 1910 and 1920. And then, some of those had been at work for a long time, but boom, all of a sudden there's a crack and you can get 4 constitutional amendments done, not just one sneaking through. And then again in the 1960s, we forget, we did 4 amendments between 1961 and 1971 in this country. When we launched American Promise, we went and talked to the people who won the 26th Amendment. It lowered the voting age to 18. They're here. They're with us. You can ask them, how did you do that? And we talked to them, and they told us. We talked to Gloria Steinem, who led the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment. We said, what happened? What did you learn by not getting ratified after coming out in the same time period of the 60s and early 70s? And she said we should have organized in the states more. And that's what the people who won the 26th Amendment said. We organized in the states. We got the states. And boom, when the moment came, when you have this moment in history when the opportunity's there to get amendments, if you're ready, you can get them. And so I think we're in an amendment era now. It looks very similar to those previous times: political assassinations, division, hyper concern about our institutions and our democratic processes, pandemic and global strife, everything. It's happening again. And I think we will see not just this amendment, but probably several amendments over the next decade or so really move forward. So we want to be ready when history calls. And I think that's the kind of moment we're going to see.
Well, since you're mentioning, bulk movements for amendments, I would like to chime in here and say my personal amendment, which is a 2/3 Senate approval for Supreme Court nominees, which would end the partisanship. But let's stick back to this one here. Your point here is that you should focus on the states, right? That's what you learned from this. And to Bob's point, right, the pushback, especially the federal level, especially with federal candidates, because that's where so much of the money goes. I wonder, there is the second way to amend the Constitution, which has never been done, which is to call a convention of states. And if you can get 2/3 of the states there, then they can propose it for 3/4 of the states to then hopefully ratify. Have you considered that? Because I feel like, I mean, honestly, just the fun of being part of the first time, like over 200 years, anybody did that would be enough to be like, we can make history. Has that been an idea for you? Because I noticed when you talked about the amendments of the Progressive Era, you said they were ratified between 1910 and 1920, which means you're thinking about Congress passing them, right? Because they weren't ratified until 1913, but they were passed by Congress earlier. So what about the Convention of States, Jeff?
Yeah, so that's back to the top of the conversation where we talked about Article 5 and these two methods. So convention is another method. If Congress doesn't do it, the states can proceed and try to convene as a convention if 2/3 of the states call for one to propose amendments, and then those amendments get ratified in 3/4 of the states. So, look, we don't feel like it's our job to dictate to Americans how to do this. I think we celebrate the American ingenuity and excitement about, hey, we can amend the Constitution, including those like you, Ben, who are saying, "Hey, let's go for it. Let's see what happens if we do a convention." I got to tell you, not everyone reacts that way. Some people say, "Let's see what happens." Yikes! If we have a convention, so we don't argue about that. I think all of the constitutional pressure that comes from Americans on this issue and others is good. So those who want to go for a convention, you go for it. We think the strategy that works is Congress because it not only has it always worked and we've never had a convention, it also keeps us unified because there are debates about, what would happen at a convention. You can get bogged down in arguing about process rather than just getting it done. But in the past, this dynamic of the American people pulling all the levers, pushing on all the buttons works. So I mentioned the amendment that got election of senators. And how did that happen? Well, partly it was that a whole bunch of states had called for a convention to propose an amendment to change the way the Senate is elected. And so as they're nearing the 2/3 threshold, the Senate suddenly wakes up and says, "Hey, we have an idea. Let's do an amendment." So I think that pressure is actually a good thing. We focus on, the strategy we think can get it done, but we welcome anybody who wants to press all the levers to create the conditions that make this amendment not only possible, but actually inevitable, because I think that's where we're headed.
Okay, so you got 23. You need 34. You said you're going to organize in 14 more states next year.
Yeah.
Next year is also a midterm year. So it's kind of like the iron is hot because, everybody's going to be really focused on the political landscape. So lay this out for us. Talk about what states you guys are hoping to move into in 2026, and where do you see this process 1 year from today?
Yeah. So, we think all 50 states matter, and we encourage whatever state you live in, join us. Go to americanpromise.net, get in the game. We support everyone everywhere. The 14 states we want to really push on, though, is part of a concerted strategy around where do the votes come from that we actually need in Congress now. So that's why we're in Texas. That's why we're in Wyoming. That's why we're in Utah. That's why Oklahoma, Missouri, Ohio, I could list more. But those kind of states do two things. One is that that's where the votes that aren't yet committed in Congress are going to come from. So we need to create the conditions in those states, not by us dropping in and sort of telling them what to do, but by supporting the people who live there to say, yeah, we're ready to ratify too. Let's do it. Getting the legislative vote in those states. And then that's what will create the conditions for the vote in Congress. So that's why we're in those states. But we need the 50 states. We need the 23 already on board to keep pushing because, it can change if you're not, staying at it. So we support business networks, local chambers, Rotaries and civic groups, young people. Anyone can help on this. And again, we don't care who you vote for. This is for everybody. So those are some of the states that we're in. Some of them are already along. Texas, we've been working in and supporting the Texans there and moving that resolution forward. As I said, we passed the House in Oklahoma, but we got to pass the Senate. The opposite problem in Wyoming, where we passed the Senate, we got to pass the House. So and then some of them are we're just beginning in, like Indiana and some other states. So that's where we are. And so I think a year from now, I always hesitate to predict anything because amendments, I think, are sort of systemic change, and there's tipping points, and we can be plodding along with a couple of states here, a couple of states there, and then suddenly, boom, it's I think, when Texas goes and some of the other big players, and this intensity of the issue, especially in the 2026 spending that's going to happen in this election, we may well see a very rapid acceleration, and that's what we expect at the end game, but that might take till 28. But so a year out from now, if we all do our job, we'll see a lot more states moving it forward. We'll see a lot more people talking about it. We'll see unexpected people, like our Democratic friends are very surprised and trying to figure out how do we work with Senator Angela Paxton? That's unexpected, but then they want the results, so they're going to. So we'll see all of that, and then we'll start seeing 23, 24, 25, and we'll see the movement in Congress with Republicans as well as Democrats to start moving it forward. So that's what and we'd like to see the national conversation. So that's why I'm so glad to be here talking with you guys. But this is something we should all be talking about, because not only is it a really serious problem, there's a really cool solution that we actually have the tools to do ourselves.
It is. And Jeff, this is what I'm processing as we're talking about this, because you have to, every amendment like this is going to have winners and losers. But it seems to me like this is one of those things where sometimes you have the problem of like the incumbents could possibly lose off of something. But we know that like the reelection rate in Congress is incredibly high. It's like over 90%, isn't it? Like of incumbents winning seats.
Yeah.
So I wonder, overall, when you consider that this doesn't seem to be a threat to the people who are incumbents, it only seems to be something that would probably weight heavier towards challengers. What's the pushback? Like, why are people saying, I don't believe we should support this?
Yeah. Well, just on one thing, I'm not sure. I think the current system does it does help incumbents because they actually control the benefits that donors can get if they
Okay.
they can punish enemies and reward friends, as politics
Okay,
is,
yeah.
right? And so the more that, and you've seen power concentrate in leadership. It's why they never leave, because they control not the money flows in the parties. They're picking and choosing the candidates who can raise the most money rather than who the local people might want to see running. And so
Wait, Jeff, so just to be clear, this isn't even
yeah.
about getting elected then, right? So the on the surface explanation of this, which is voicing your opinion about who you want to be voted, that's not even the issue. The issue is really just building domains.
Yeah, a lot of it. It really is. It's about power. It's really is. And so, so I think on the challengers versus incumbents, it's awfully hard to be a challenger now when you got to raise, unless you have a lot of money, unless you're a billionaire, and you can spend your own money on it. It's difficult to be a challenger in this current system. So challengers would like to see, I think, a more competitive playing field where they can run, and so that they'd like the amendment. And I think for incumbents, it is about whether the current system is sustainable, because like you were saying, Bob, you may not like Elon Musk, but if you're a Republican, you got to play ball with him and suck up to him. And the Democrats have the same problem with their billionaires, whether it's George Soros or Pritzker or somebody else. And that's not much fun if you're an incumbent. So the incentives to vote for this are pretty clear. So who's against it, Ben, to your question? I think, look, the Supreme Court are not dumb people. This isn't like I respect the theory that the First Amendment has something to do with spending money. You wouldn't want to see like censorship of any kind of effort to broadcast your speech, right? So there's a real First Amendment issue in this, and so sometimes people are concerned about that. Like if we if we do this amendment, what if Congress decides, nobody can spend any money, and then you don't have any information. That doesn't happen. It's never happened. It's not going to happen. But that's why our amendment is framed in those First Amendment terms. It's about free speech, but it's a much better way to protect free speech and our system than what the court has done. But there are people, maybe 5-10% who are going to say, I don't know, we probably shouldn't do an amendment. I like the notion of unlimited money and no regulation. But we win that debate all day long. So it's just, when you go, I'll take 85-15 anytime. So we're fine there. The bigger hurdle, though, the bigger thing that we focus on about opposition is the multi-billion-dollar political industrial complex that is now gotten so strong in these past 20 years. And there's no question they're not going to come out and have a debate about free speech. They're going to be behind the scenes trying to block this, stop this threat, whatever they can do. But I'll take that. I'll take our odds on that one too. I'll take all the American people. I'll take many, many people, including those who have plenty of resources, who say that we got to fix this system or we're all going down, right? So we've proven we can overcome that's why we do these votes in the states. It's good practice and good tests. Can we overcome those kind of pressures? And we do. So, 63-9 in the Utah House, that means 9 people voted against it, but I'll take 63-9 any day, right? So that's the opposition. That's the fight that we all have. And that's why we think we can win this.
Jeff Clements, we're so grateful for your time. Where can people find out more about this amendment, and where can they go to voice their support?
One and the same. Go to AmericanPromise.net. Just Google American Promise, Constitutional Amendment, whatever you want, AmericanPromise.net. And you can sign up there. If you're just curious and you want to learn a little more, just sign up. We won't bury you in emails, I promise you. But if you're ready to get in the game, we have something we call the Citizen Pledge. And part of that is to just say, hey, let's stop talking ourselves out of it or discouraging ourselves. Let's pledge, like, hey, if you think this is a good idea, put your John Hancock down, just like the founders did. That was a declaration of independence. It didn't mean you had independence. And just like this, declare that you're for this, and it helps make it real. So sign the Citizen Pledge. And then there's a place you can sign when you really want to get in the game to volunteer. And we'll ask you, tell us where you live so we can help support you in your community and get you involved as a volunteer. So all kinds of ways. We got the business network, we got the civic networks, we got lots of ways of getting involved. But the starting point is go to AmericanPromise.net.
Well, in the past 3 minutes, I just did it. I signed up.
All right, Bob.
And so I am on the team. And that took me about all of 3 minutes. So it's everybody out there listening. You can do it before the end of this episode, I am sure.
Bob beat me to it because I've got the website pulled up right here and I have the link ready to sign up as well.
Thanks, guys. Great to have you on board, and I hope all your listeners will join us.
And hey,
thank you.
I just donated $25.
Oh,
let's make it go. Let's make it happen, everybody.
Let's do it.
Bob, quick, donate everything you have before this constitutional amendment limits your ability to do that. Quick.
Hey, thanks guys. Jeff. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, Jeff, and we'll be following along, and feel free to come back anytime.
Would love to. Would love to keep you updated, and really appreciate the conversation and the support, Bob and Ben. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for listening to The Road to Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell the world by giving us 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or 5 stars on Spotify. Or spread the word directly. Just text a friend maybe, or share a link on social media. Anything helps and we appreciate it. And if you've got a friend who hasn't gotten into podcasts yet, let them know they can hear us every weekend on SiriusXM's POTUS Channel 124. Now is the time when we say our special thanks to our supporters on Patreon and give a shout out to our Washingtonians. That list is Tanya Marsh, Mary Hawking, Tim and Caitlin Wells, Fig White, Matt Williams, Team Martin, Ann Williams and Frank Edwards, Nate Farrer, Jennifer and Magnolia, Chris and Teresa Adams, Joy Avery, Edward Carlson, and Aaron and Derek Garrison. Thanks to all you guys for supporting us. If you want to support our work and maybe get on that list, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/theroadtonow. You'll get extended versions of select conversations, extra episodes, bonus materials, and more. That's all available at patreon.com/theroadtonow. For more on the show, visit our website, theroadtonow.com, where you can easily search our back catalog and quickly find links to content. Why is it so good? 7 Ages Design. That's who made it. If you're looking for a website, go check them out. The Road to Now is hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and me, Ben Sawyer. Our associate producer is Gary Fletcher. This episode was edited by Ben Sawyer, and our theme music, like pretty much always, was by Paul DeFiglia. For Bob Crawford, this is Ben Sawyer. Thank you for listening. Take care.